Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name's Rob, and I'll be moderating this session. Before we get started, though, I'm just going to quickly launch a poll, and I will be interested to get everybody's opinions on a question which is near and dear to our hearts, and which has come up many times before. Where do you wish you could charge more in the production process? We will give you a few seconds to answer that before I jump into the plan for the next half an hour. And we will close the poll in just a few seconds. Give it a few more seconds. Awesome, thank you very much. So, the plan for today is I'll introduce the speakers in a moment before I hand over as they talk through these topics. So we're going to be looking at the trends and the evolution of the video production industry, how to create storytelling excellence from the processes to tools and the tricks. And finally, we'll look at the storytelling in motion, actually looking at a real life example. We are hoping to have some time for questions at the end, so please do use the question functionality with GoToWebinar, which should be visible on your control panel. And then I'll field those questions at the end to put to our speakers. So to introduce our speakers, I'm joined by my colleague, Phill, who heads up our product marketing function here at Trint. His job here is to bring the products to life through the messaging and ideas and stories. And then we're also delighted to be joined by Amina Moreau, the co-founder of 5-time Emmy Award winning Stillmotion and Sway Storytelling. Having worked with everyone from startups to Fortune 500 companies, she's navigated countless challenges in client alignment, story development, production efficiency, business pivots, and the nuanced elegance of the language of film. Nowadays, one of her greatest passions is empowering other creatives to be able to do more of what they love by sharing what she's learned along the way. We're delighted to have her. And with that, let me hand over to Phill to start the conversation.
Wonderful. Rob, thank you for the introduction, and delighted to be joined by everyone on the call today. Thanks so much for taking some of your time out and participating in the conversation. So we're here to talk a little bit about how to craft better video and how to edit better as well, edit faster, how we can better plan and prepare our video production, and ultimately make it come all together in the editing room. And before we just kick off the conversation with Amina, I just want to set the scene a little bit for everyone on the call, and really just try and, I guess, frame some of the challenges, the opportunities that we're seeing writ large in this industry. And look, it's not going to come as a surprise to pretty much anyone on this call, but we are really living in this age of video storytelling. Consumption and creation have just gone through the roof. These trends have been propelled by the ease of use of social media and sharing video content very quickly. Also, the vast proliferation and adoption of mobile devices globally have just made video a pretty perfect vehicle to communicate. And of course, if you also argue that our dwindling attention spans have anything to do with it, you can also see that video really speaks to today's zeitgeist and to the way that people engage with content and their preferences. And so look, I'm just going to walk you through some recent stats that sort of scope out the demand. And effectively, the bottom line is that organizations are finally noticing. And while that's a good thing for the business and for the industry, it does put a lot of pressure on your shoulders, the creators, to create at a high quality level and to do so quickly. So let's just run through these very quickly together. So the first one is, look, businesses have recognized that video is a pretty fabulous tool. The adoption is going through the roof, according to HubSpot, and that growth is pretty remarkable. Why are they doing it? Because it turns out that video is actually just a better way to engage an audience, whether you're trying to get someone to sign up for a newsletter, or to buy something, doesn't matter. Video just has a higher percentage of conversion, which is certainly noteworthy. But of course, there's a reason for that, right? And there's retention of information there. People are seeing and engaging with the content in a way that's much deeper, that's much more profound than your sort of typical content, especially over text. So there is that big shift in the landscape. And look, we could spend all day on stats. There's probably a video stat for every new video published on a daily basis, so we don't need to spend too much time there. But you get the picture. We're living in this age of really heightened demand. So look, we're just going to move over to the conversation with Amina now. But before we do, we'd love to hear from you again. And Rob is just going to add in one more poll here, where we'd like to just ask you about sort of where in your production process you currently see the most friction. I think that's an intriguing result because there's something there that I think will be very pertinent to our conversation. So I'm just going to give you all 15, 20 seconds, and then we will begin the conversation. So Amina, as we wait for the polls to be populated, now that we've covered the basics, I want to first say thank you for joining us today and for having the conversation. So welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an incredibly difficult time, I think, for everyone, but certainly for filmmakers. We really want to just be out there doing what we love. And so if we can't be doing that right now, at least maybe not in the same capacity as we were in prior years, then at least we can come together as a community, talk about the challenges that we face, and work together to come up with some solutions, pandemic or not. And so I'm really excited for this conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, we're delighted to have you. So, I mean, these stats that we flash through and the ones you can see on the screen, it can't be a surprise to you at all. Everyone wants video. That's pretty obvious. I'm wondering, what is the big difference between now and when you started in the industry? Is that the major change, or what have you seen as the big variance?
Yeah. Look, I've been in the industry for a good 15 plus years now, and a ton has changed since then. I come from the days when we were putting brevis adapters on our big bazooka cameras and trying to be discreet somehow. And at that time, in some ways, video was more challenging because we didn't have the same sort of tools that we have today. But in other ways, it was easier to differentiate as a filmmaking studio because if we took things just a step further by buying those brevis adapters, or by thinking a little bit more deeply about our techniques or about storytelling, which was an evolution for us for sure. It wasn't like from the very beginning we were thinking about storytelling. In some ways, it was easier to differentiate then than it is now. And I think the big reason is because all of this equipment, all of these techniques have been democratized, which I think is a great thing. Now, the barrier to entry is quite a bit lower than it was before. You don't have to spend as much money and make as big an investment in gear and all of those toys, which are fun to buy. But to just get started, you can, it still costs a little bit, but far less than it used to in order to create a beautiful image. And so while I love that, and I think that it opens up possibility for our industry, on the other hand, it means that at this point, it's actually difficult to create a bad looking image. And so if everybody is creating beautiful footage, how do you differentiate? And so that's a challenge I think we're facing now as filmmakers that maybe wasn't as big of an issue a few years ago.
Right. So there's this kind of rising tide of content creation because anyone can now sort of use a sort of a freemium or open source video editing software and can buy a pretty high quality camera for quite cheap, or even a cool toy like a drone or something, and produce some pretty interesting or at least attractive footage. But I guess, is there something around, even though the baseline kind of quality has been raised, I wonder, is that a good challenge for the video production, the video editing community, or is it just a negative? How would you kind of think about it?
I think it's a positive in many different ways. First of all, there are so many talented, hardworking creatives out there that now have a greater chance to do something that they're going to love doing. And over my career, my team has hosted a lot of different types of workshops, production workshops, storytelling workshops, and in every one of them, there was somebody that either left a more traditional 9-to-5 job to pursue this as a passion, or somebody that was straight out of school and just wanted to give it a shot. And I think for both of those people, the harder it is to get started, the more difficult it is to make that leap. And now, if that leap is just a little bit smaller, people can pursue their passions and not be held back by fear quite so much, because maybe it's not as big a risk. And that is so exciting to me, because if there's anything that I want to come away from this webinar with, is inspiration to just go do what we love, because life is short. Clearly, we're living in difficult times now. And I mean, if there's just one person in our audience today that comes away feeling just a little bit more inspired to go after it, whatever that is, then I will feel like a mission was accomplished and that we did good work here. But to your point, I do also think that it introduces difficulties, and it could be discouraging to some who buy that camera, get the audio set up, get a little bit of lighting off of Amazon or wherever, and they start doing some video work thinking it's going to be enough. And 10 years ago, it absolutely would have been, because if you were using this camera and this audio setup that you spent relatively little money on compared to what that quality would have cost, in 2010, like, you would have been just blowing people's minds with what you could do with that little money. Now, you create your first film and it looks fantastic, but that's not enough. And so I want to applaud everybody that's joined us on this webinar today, because it means that you recognize that there's more work to do. You're here because you're the type of person that wants to learn and wants to level up. And so I'm really looking forward to having a discussion about what it is that we can do as filmmakers to push ourselves further. Because when creating a beautiful image is not enough, well, what is enough? What can we do to take that to the next level so that A, we can differentiate more, B, we can charge what we're worth when we're working with our clients, and we can have the budgets and the creative freedom to truly do the work that we love, because nobody got into this to do what someone else wanted us to do. We got into this business because we have a creative vision and we want to execute it.
Yeah, I love that. So it's almost like the rising tide of technology and tools has created this on-ramp for talent in a way that just wouldn't have been possible, X number of years ago. So that's very exciting. Yeah. But it's almost like we've leveled. So. Yeah, but we've leveled up on the technology side, but it was almost there's more leveling up to do on the actual the quality side and the storytelling side and the planning side. So I think that's sort of an interesting place to kind of take our conversation. But I would like to just double click a little bit, Amina, around the like what these challenges we looked at, what does that actually mean for our video editors and our video producers and anyone involved in video content production. So we've obviously got, this voracious demand and consumption from the market today, and that's probably only going to go up, let's be honest, especially as the pandemic sort of opens up in what's hopefully the next few months. But you can only see a rising demand there. So you've got this demand element that's very interesting, but you also have, as you were mentioning, this big changes in the competition, right? There is more consumption. There are more tools available. There is better technology available. So we have that kind of dynamic. So What does that mean for our video production professionals today? How does that impact their working lives, and what are they up against?
Yeah, I think a really big challenge is the expectations that have been set as a result, because our clients all realize this. They all realize that our equipment is, and maybe it's not like on a conscious level, they're really analyzing how much they think we're spending on things, but because the equipment and the techniques have been more democratized, it has started to set an expectation that things can be produced cheaply, they can be produced quickly, and the quality is going to be great. And this is that, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this Venn diagram. This is like the impossible utopia that our clients often expect: fast, good, and cheap. It's got to be fast, good, and cheap. And the reality is, pick two. You might be able to have really good quality really quickly, but if you want those two, it's going to be expensive. Like, there's going to be a premium, because the kinds of studios that can do really high quality work really efficiently, they know their worth and they bill for it. On the flip side, if you have a client that wants something really quickly, but also wants it to be cheap, well, they might need to realize that sacrificing on quality, at least to a degree, might be a reality. And then there's the, okay, we want really high quality, but we don't want to spend a lot. And that's, I don't know, maybe the hardest one. I don't know, because I also think that filmmakers these days recognize these challenges and these heightened expectations and are maybe undercharging because they think they have to. And I think we can talk about that today, about how you can maybe boost your prices a little bit, not at all to price gouge anyone, but to just charge what you're worth. But when a client comes in and they want quality through the roof, but aren't really willing to put their money where their mouth is, first of all, I think that should be considered maybe a orange or yellow flag. Maybe they just don't know what it takes, and they're willing to listen, but maybe they just don't really value the quality that much. And at that point, looking back at this Venn diagram, you got to ask, well, all right, if I'm going to do really great work and I'm going to do it cheaply, am I also going to kill myself to do it on a quick turnaround? And again, I think that customers these days, and whether we're talking about corporate clients coming in, we're talking about commercials. I come from that world, but also we used to do a lot of weddings, and these expectations, they seem to be across verticals. It's not just one that thinks this way. And so I think that we need to recognize that, and we need to really think for ourselves as filmmakers and as studios, okay, which two do I really want to prioritize? Do I want to be the fast and cheap solution? And maybe that really does fit your business model. I'm not going to say that one combination is better, quote, than another. It totally depends on what your business model and your passions are. Do you want to do the highest quality for the lowest price and be super competitive, but take maybe a little longer to do it? Or do you want to be the highest quality in your neck of the woods and really fast, but bill a lot for it? And I think these are questions that we should be asking ourselves, but then resetting expectations with the people that we're working with so that everyone's on the same page. And when I say everyone, I also don't just mean the clients that we're working with, but if we're working in a team, I think we also need to be on the same page internally. Because if you're the director and you're going for quality and price, but your editor is going for quality and speed, which is actually probably usually the reverse. Maybe it's producers that are quality and speed. But I think you get my point, right? If there's a misalignment internally on the team, then there are probably going to be unmet expectations. And so I think for that reason, it's just so important to decide. And I think maybe our next slide has that perfect blend illustrated really well, that yeah, okay, so we've got these 3 bubbles, pick 2. You know, it's going to be one of those shaded blue areas, the combination of 2 of those circles. That's going to be the most realistic way forward.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And look, you mentioned also this notion of efficiency a few times as well, and like what is the right allocation of time and resources here? That's kind of what we're looking at. And I'm curious, just before we go into some of your ideas around, what can video producers, what can video editors be doing against these expectations, and against the sort of the weight of the market appetite. I know that you consult a lot with different storytellers. I wonder, are you seeing other things around that need to be improved kind of across the board around people's the work itself, or sort of the way that projects are approached, or what else are you seeing that needs to be addressed in the market?
Well, I think that a big question we need to be asking ourselves as creatives is truly what kind of work do we want to be doing? And I'm not sure that question really gets enough attention. I think we have a vague idea, but I'm talking about getting really specific. Who are the kinds of customers? Where do they shop? How much money do we feel is worth our time for particular types of projects? How do we budget, therefore? But just what kind of stories do we want to be telling? And I think the more concretely and the more specifically we have those things defined, then we can go and make a plan for how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a goal in order to go on the journey to find that goal. I mean, it's actually very analogous to storytelling itself, right? Think of ourselves as the hero on a 3-act structure journey to tell the stories of our dreams. But we have all of these challenges along the way of that story arc, and we have these conflicts, expectations being one of them. And so if we think of ourselves as though we are working towards something, we have to define that something. And then we have to take the steps in order to get there. And one of the things that I keep saying, I keep seeing this challenge, this issue over and over again, and talking about it over and over again, and it makes me think that it's really pervasive in the industry, and that is showing the wrong work in our portfolios. And what do I mean about the wrong work? Well, if you think about your website, and therefore I'm assuming that you have portfolio pieces on your website. If you think of it as a salesperson, they have to be selling the right thing. If your dream is to create really powerful, character-driven stories that are 3 to 5 minute vignettes for corporate clients, let's say, but your portfolio is full of 30-second spots with really flashy footage and a bunch of one-liners and doesn't have a whole lot of story behind it, then that salesperson is selling the wrong thing, because it's going to attract people who want the type of work that they're seeing. And so you're going to get a bunch of inquiries for 30-second spots that are really flashy and might have been really fun to do. But if it's not the type of work that you want to be doing in the future, then you're going to have an uphill battle to then convince those people, oh no, you don't want that. You want this story-driven thing. You want this longer film approach where we can do a deeper dive into the characters and what they care about. And now you're trying to convince people and change people's minds. And that is a lot harder than just attract the people who already want the kind of work that you want to do. And so if you want to be doing these 3 to 5 minute vignettes, that's what you've got to be showing on your website. And what if you only have one? Well, I think that showing one piece in your portfolio that is the perfect representation of the type of work you want to be doing in the future, that's better than having 20 portfolio pieces that sell the wrong thing. But again, circling back, it comes back to what kind of work you want to be doing. And so getting specific about that type of work, and then not being afraid to say, yeah, this is what I'm good at, and this is what we do, and this is what we want to do more of. And if you don't want that, then being okay if those clients never get in touch with you, because that makes room for the people who do want what you do, and now you can give them all your attention.
Yeah, and that's I think great advice for the audience. And you also mentioned, the sort of a few times, character-driven stories and the 3-act structure and so on. So I think that's actually a nice place to drop another poll. And as we transition to sort of our approaches to really this, superior editing practices and storytelling. So I think Rob's going to jump in with another poll just around the 3-act structure and sort of how often you actually deploy it in your work. So I'll just let that hang there for a second and move over to our next slide. And she just bring up the 3-act structure here because we're going to talk about it with Amina. So Amina, as we let the audience look at the poll and sort of add their responses, kind of curious from your point of view, what are the things, there's obviously a lot of challenges, there's a lot of maybe unmet opportunity as well, especially when it goes to setting those expectations. But what are some of the things that work, to counter these competitive challenges and these expectations and this kind of client management and your own portfolio management? I think we can probably lead in with the 3-act structure, but yeah, what are some of your ideas?
Yeah, I think it's just being really honest with ourselves about what we love, but then being really transparent and even showing some vulnerability with the clients that we're working with and truly feeling like a team. Part of the reason that our clients sometimes take the reins a little bit more than we want them to, and maybe they take away a little bit more creative control than we wish, largely has to do with A, mismanaged expectations, but B, sometimes it comes down to a lack of trust. And I don't mean that in a really negative way. I don't mean that they think that you're going to let them down. I don't think it's that at all. And of course, some people have been burned, and so we might need to take that into account. But when I say trust, I just mean confidence in each other's abilities to contribute to the project, the expertise that we really bring to the table. And so when I am working on a film for a client of mine, first of all, I see them just as much a part of the team as I do the folks that might be shooting, the folks that are editing, in charge of lighting. Everybody has a role, including the client. And I make that clear through the interactions that we have right from the beginning. But it's not to say that just because they're a part of the team, now they get like 100% control over everything. No team member has that sort of control. And that's the point. The way that I think we should be kind of structuring additional expectations with our clients is that we're all subject matter experts in different things though. And so if we're telling a corporate story for a company and we have a point of contact over there that's a big part of this project, they are the expert in their company. They are the expert in their industry and what they bring. And they probably know their audience better than we do, even though we've researched them as well, but they live and breathe this stuff. And so I don't think we can just say, all right, we'll handle it. No. And if we really truly make them feel like they are part of the equation, but also set the expectation that we are a big part of the equation and we bring skills and knowledge and experience to the table that they don't necessarily have, that we're going to be better together. And if we have these conversations really early on, even before any contracts are signed, like as part of the sales process, heck, maybe even on the website, then it starts to foster that trust really early on in the process. And then the expectations are set kind of piecemeal as we go along. And it's not this huge discussion that has to be super dramatic. It's just, oh, we trust each other. That's cool. Let's do some good work together.
Yeah, and you also mentioned this notion of being a subject matter expert, Amina, and kind of everyone playing their various roles on fulfilling a project. And it does kind of, it's a nice segue into kind of talking about sort of the art of storytelling and sort of the subject matter expertise of that, of that skill set and bringing that to kind of these client projects as well. I'm not sure if you can see the poll, but we have sort of interesting results on sort of how often people are using this structure. And we've got 13% that say never, 50% that say sometimes, 30% that say often, and then 7% that say all the time. So we definitely have a minority that are kind of trending towards this sort of consistent deployment of the 3-act structure. So yeah, what are your observations on that? And I think just broadly, because I know you're quite a passionate, exponent for this approach. So how does that strike you, and sort of what would your advice be on the storytelling structure itself?
Well, I would love for anybody to maybe elaborate why that is and what that's about in the chat. As we get to our Q&A, that might be an interesting point of discussion. I think that sometimes people aren't using, and look, I'm not going to say that 3-act structure is the be-all end-all. It's not the only way to structure a film, but it has been proven time and time again to be very effective. And so I'm sure that a proportion of our respondents today are not using it because they feel like they have something better that works just as well or even better for their purposes, and that's great. I think that there are probably some that don't use it very often because maybe they still have questions about how to really use that structure and like kind of the tactics of that part of things. And then I'm betting that there's a large proportion of people who wish they could do it more, but for whatever reason, their clients are not letting them. And that might come back to expectation setting. Again, showing the kind of work that represents what you want to be doing, represents the kinds of clients that you want to be attracting, and putting that out there, and then setting expectations for why the structure you choose to use, whether it's 3 acts or not, is going to be effective for the particular goals that your client has.
Right. Okay. And that's kind of, yeah, seems like it can be a potential differentiator too, if that's something that you can apply with, with expertise to each of these projects.
Absolutely. Well, because if the results of this poll are representative of the general population of filmmakers and studios, and a minority is doing a more structured work, if I'm interpreting the results correctly, then that means that there's a bigger opportunity to stand out. So if we put a greater effort into doing what other people aren't, that's the definition of differentiation.
Right. Right, exactly. Yeah. And look, we've actually, just to poke some fun at ourselves, we've actually deployed a 3-act structure ourselves on this webinar, so you can kind of see very much the conversation has followed this path itself. So I definitely think that, agree with you, Amina, that's something that can act as a differentiator and certainly, create more compelling stories. I guess I'm curious as well. So, sorry, go ahead.
I think I was just going to jump into answering the question you were about to ask. I have a feeling because I think we're on the same page about things. But go ahead with your question.
No, after you, I insist.
Well, I was just going to say that I really appreciated that you and Rob were willing to spend so much time with me on pre-production for this webinar. I think that, and I didn't get to see the results of the poll about the different phases of projects, but from the conversations I've had over the years with filmmakers, one of the biggest like wish list items is, I wish I had more time for pre-production. I wish I could get paid for it at all, let alone charge more for it. And I think we all recognize that pre-pro is what sets a project up for success. It's the planning stage, right? It's what enables us to find the story in pre instead of finding the story in post. And we know that that's so much easier to do ahead of time and then shoot only what we need, then overshoot and then cross our fingers that we can find something good in post. And I feel like this is what we did, the 3 of us, as we were planning for this webinar. We thought of it as a 3-act structure. And that first act started with, and I don't want to give away the ending quite yet, but we started with a strong hook. We really wanted to get the audience engaged right from the beginning. So I started with a poll and went straight into character development and setting the scene. And then we introduced a conflict. And we started talking about expectations and the challenges of democratized equipment and techniques, and how that is a blessing, but also a little bit of a curse that maybe we can overcome. And in Act 2, we explored the tension that exists that maybe as filmmakers we can try to overcome. And I think we're starting to hint at the top of this curve, and explore things like differentiation that could help us in our both business journeys, but also our storytelling journeys, so we can really tell the stories that we love. But I don't know, Phill, should we leave it at a cliffhanger right here, or should we go to the next slide and talk about what that climax is? What is the be all end all answer to all of our woes in this 3-act structure?
Indeed. Yeah, no, you've set it up nicely there. And look, I think that from what we've seen from our audience today, there's definitely, from what we're going to be talking a little about how we can make the post-production process smoother, how you can edit faster, and so on. So I think that is a nice segue. And just to kind of share the stats here, where we see that there's the most friction. 35% of you said that it was in post-production, whereas 53% said it's in pre-production. So kind of nicely follows on what you just shared, Amina. But we do want to walk you through sort of.
And I wonder how much of the friction in post-production is caused by not having enough time and resources for pre-production. So that's a question I think that we should be asking ourselves. All of the friction that we feel in all of the other phases, in fact, could it be addressed by spending a little bit more time and effort in pre-production?
Exactly. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to add it to the chat. I think it'd be very interesting to hear anyone's perspectives, and of course, feel free to contribute in the Q&A in a few minutes. So let's pivot then, Amina, to some post-production tooling, and sort of we're obviously here to think about, okay, we've talked about differentiation, we've talked about managing, the client and those expectations, and setting up a really trustful relationship between, your client and your own team. And now we want to talk a little about how does that actually, trickle down into the editing process. So we're going to walk you through sort of our answer to some of these questions and some of these challenges that is in very much the post-production phase. So I'm gonna pivot over to Trint, to our storytelling functionality. So hold on one second.
So while Phill is doing that, I just want to give everybody a little bit of background about why I've partnered with Trint in the first place. I was using Trint as a tool well before I was introduced to these guys, just because it was helping on the post-production side, and to the degree that I had to get in touch with these guys. So I wanted to put that out there, that my partnering with Rob and Phill was instigated from my end, because I saw this as such a valuable tool, and I wanted to get in touch with these guys about partnering on a greater level, because it was providing my team with such a great resource for smoothing out our process. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I really love this thing, and I really am finding a lot of value in this tool that you're bringing up right now. And I think that it has a lot of potential ahead, because it's still very new. It's already great, but I think that as we get people using it and getting feedback, this thing is going to be such an amazing tool moving forward.
Yeah, no, thank you for the endorsement, Amina. Yeah. So and I think in the spirit of kind of illustrating that this is the beginning of it, and we really have built this with video editors, video producers in mind. And so the more that we hear from you, the better we can make it, hopefully, and really, meet the challenges of those post-production workflows. So Amina, here we've got, you can just see my screen here. We've got just a few different files. So these could be, in this case, these are interviews that you've done on your side, but picture a number of different rushes that you've done or shoots. You can basically get transcribed in here, and you know, at this point, we've got all this disparate content, and I'm guessing you want to try and get to some sort of script or rough cut, right? So that's kind of the challenge
Yeah.
we're in. So let me
Yeah.
kind of walk.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that before this came along, our workflow I thought was working. Like, it's not like it was broken, but basically what we would do. So while I can shoot and I can edit, I play the role of director most often when we're on set. And so our just really quick kind of nutshell of a workflow after pre-production, we got into production. If we were doing an interview-based piece, we would have at the end of the day a number of interviews, and we would get them transcribed. But then I would be sitting there on the flight or late at night, and I would be in a Word document going through and cutting and pasting different quotes so that I could put together a paper edit for my editor. And my editor already had the 3-act structure mapped out from pre-production. But as the director who was conducting the interviews, I knew that there were specific lines and mentions that they're gonna have to make the cut. And so I would be sitting there cutting and pasting, and it was taking so long. And it was working. But now that I have this tool, I realize just how inefficient that was, and I could have probably done it in like a fifth of the time.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the kind of, you know, pain we're trying to solve here, right? Is this sort of very disconnected and sort of frustrating experience in trying to stitch that story together. And so what we're seeing here, I mean, is actually, this is your work. You've, you know, as a director in this case, you've highlighted for me that these are important parts, right? You said this is the exact moment that I want to capture. And you can obviously, you know, you could have added some comments here if you wanted to, or other ways of kind of indicating its importance. But you know, you've already gone through and said, look, I really want this. I want to see what this looks like, you know, in a rough cut, or in a draft at least. So then what I can do from my side is I can actually start to gather this together and put it into one place. So the transcript, look, this is already quite nice. It's time coded. You can see where everything is being said. I can you know, play back and listen to it at the same time. But where it gets very interesting is when we start to build that paper edit. So I'm going to add this to a story that I've created with Amina already. So this is basically bringing in all these yellow highlights that Amina has pre-selected and said, this is what I care about. The rest is, you know, is unimportant. And I can go in here and now add it to the story. And so in that story, I'm just going to pop this open. At this point, we've now added these new chunks at the top. So you can see they've come in from this number 3 helping competitors file. And we've also pre-populated it with some of the other draft footage from the 2 other files that were in the folder. And so we now have this amalgam of quotes in one place that you can look at and interact with. So what would you do next, Amina? So you've got these different things gathered. I guess what would your process be now that you have it in one story?
Well, what I love about this is that you can reorder these just at a glance. And so if you know, when we're interviewing somebody, we're not necessarily going in story order. Oftentimes we'll ask questions in whatever order works best for a natural and conversational flow, but it's not necessarily in the same order that the edit is going to fall into. And so it's not enough to just have highlighted quotes, but what's great about this tool is that we can actually put them into order. And so in that 3-act structure, we can have that area for character development and then move the quotes from different interviews all into one chunk so that they flow in a particular way. And we can even label them as Act 1, or this is the conflict section. And then, I mean, just the fact that you can also hit play and hear how that line was delivered. I think we've all been in that scenario where we've got a transcript, we have a sentence that reads perfectly on paper, and we want that sentence to finish with a really great hard stop at the end. like that sentence. But we've been in that situation where it looks great on paper, but when you listen to it, it's either a run-on sentence or it didn't end with a nice clean period. It landed on a period, and now it doesn't feel like a conclusive stop anymore. And so what I love about this is that you can actually hear how it's delivered. You can hear how one line from one interviewee flows into the beginning of the next one and make sure that it's actually going to work. And that's what was so hard about just using Microsoft Word or whatever Pages, is that you couldn't hear it. And so I was never sure that what I was sending to my editor was actually possible. And was I wasting their time on top of my own? Ugh. So this has been a great tool for that.
So we can even see, I'll just quickly play this and we can check it out to see how it actually sounds in practice. Let's see.
It makes it harder for them to price it in a way that's fair. Like, you shouldn't be competing with somebody.
So it's almost like, I don't know, do we like the end of that one, Amina, or was that the kind of finality that you're looking for?
Well, but sometimes you don't want a finale. That's the point, right? Because if one thought, even if it's from a different interview, if one thought actually helps complete a thought, then sometimes you don't want it to be a hard stop. You want it to end on the upswing so that you can then come down in the next sentence. And so every single clip is different. The point is, you want to know if it fits. And this is great.
So this basically helps you to you have the text content, but you can also have it married to the sound and to the visual, and you can actually start making some editorial decisions before, I guess, even needing to involve your editor, right? Because you're starting to kind of craft that together and build out that, you know, in this case, a 3-act structure, right? That you want to convey that specific message to the audience.
Absolutely. But the last thing I want to do is make my editor feel like I am taking all of their creative control away. So the way that I set expectations with that person is, I'm going to put together some line pulls because I've been working with the client for months on what this story needs to be. So I'm intimately aware of all the nuances that we need to include and don't. So I'm going to get a head start for you. And usually that's welcome because, you know, we can export an XML from this. You know, I think you have different file formats that we can export, bring it right into Premiere, whatever software you're using, and it's going to find those clips for the editor, which saves them time. But I also want to make sure that they know some of these are must-haves, absolutely. But some of these are nice-to-haves. Please use your judgment, you know, because you are the expert, you are the editor, and I don't want to take all the creative control away from you. We need to work together as a team.
Right. I love that. I think that kind of collaboration is really critical, especially to work more efficiently, right? And to kind of make sure that everyone is bringing their creative energy in the right way to these projects. And to your point, I mean, you know, you can take this forward if you just want to kind of get that clean paper edit, download that Microsoft Word document, and it's all in there along with all the time codes. So you've got that nice paper editor there. And then also there's these EDL and XML imports or exports, sorry, that you can then import into onward editing software like Adobe, like Avid, like Final Cut Pro, where once you upload that and point it to the original document, you can sort of pre-sequence that rough cut and save your editor all that time scrubbing and sequencing for those right time codes. But I see we've got probably only a few minutes left, so I'd love to kind of hear from our audience, and maybe we should pivot back and go into some questions. So before we do, just a quick summary of what we've covered today.
Phill, can we really quickly just go back to that previous slide, because I don't think that we actually ended up giving away the ending. So that 3-act structure slide. And I think, look, I said be all end all solution. There never is one. There's no silver bullet. But I do think that as storytellers, as filmmakers, with all of our rising tensions in our second act and the conflicts that we face with our clients and just with the state of the industry, I do think that great storytelling and really understanding what that is, and it's being thrown around like a buzzword left, right, and center. And so what is storytelling? It's tough to define right now because everybody's a storyteller. So I really challenge everybody today to think about, well, okay, what is storytelling to me? And how am I completely unique? You know, how am I one of the 7 point whatever billion people on the planet that is so unique that nobody can replicate, nobody can come close to what I can do, but also the way that I think, the way that I show up in the world. And I think that is probably the biggest answer. Storytelling is a big part of that, but I think really looking within ourselves, that's probably the biggest one.
I love it.
Thanks.
Good place to conclude. So very quickly then, just to a quick summary from the conversation today. We know that video is becoming this massive growth channel to communicate with audiences. Demand is growing and skyrocketing, and that means basically standing out and differentiating has become harder and harder. And with those expectations growing, there's a lot of benefits to basically own that relationship with the client, but then also to master that storytelling engine that helps you to again differentiate yourself and create wonderful content. So I'm going to hand it over to Rob for the Q&A.
Thank you, Phill. We've only got a few minutes left, so unfortunately we won't be able to answer all of the questions, but there's a couple of really interesting ones that have come through. The first one I think is really relevant, especially in this environment of, I suppose, risk-averse environment. But we've been asked, I think commissioners are still reluctant to take risks with new ideas. How do you think the industry can challenge the safe approach that limits truly creative expression?
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that the biggest risk that you can take is playing it safe. Now, it's a blanket statement. I don't think that applies to all situations, but yeah, trying new things is scarier than just doing what's tried and true. But tried and true sometimes gets tired. And so I think part of it comes back to how are we talking about the work that we do? And if fear of risk and fear of flopping because there are risks is the conflict that stands in the way of our clients' desires, then I think it's important to address that and understand where that fear is coming from. And that does require having some deeper conversations with them and understanding where they're coming from, and maybe not jumping to conclusions or making too many assumptions about why they're afraid of this before we really know like why it is they feel that. I think it's easy to jump to the conclusion that they're just not very forward thinking, or they're just old-fashioned, or they just don't get it. But I think in some ways, I mean, certainly there are some people that just don't get it, and we should probably let them find another solution besides us. But sometimes maybe we don't give people enough credit, and if we took the time to really understand where their concerns are coming from and maybe research some things ahead of time so that we have some answers in our back pocket to throw at them and some potential solutions to their challenges and really make them feel heard. Goodness, making people feel heard does wonders for that sense of trust, and trust makes people feel at greater ease. And when they're afraid of risk, feelings of ease are everything. I don't know, does that help? Does that kind of get at things? What do you think, Phill?
Yeah, look, I mean, you know better than me, but I think that is the right message. Yes, it is. Yeah, certainly.
Thank you, Amina. I think we've got probably got time for one more question, but this is, I think, quite an interesting one, especially with the way that sort of some education or some impact on the education and the way that that younger filmmakers are getting into the media production. So the question is, as a young filmmaker currently in their final year of university studying media production, I've started transitioning into freelance work and I'm finding it difficult to know where to start or how to get people to see me. What advice would you give regarding this?
It's like we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, it's harder to start today than it was 10 years ago. But it's easier to start today, maybe, than it will be next year and the year after and the year after, although it's a pandemic. So let me preface that with, if you're just branching out now, I don't think that 2021 is going to be free of challenges. I think that this might still be a slightly harder year for filmmakers than maybe the following year. I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but my biggest advice is don't get discouraged. If you're a freelancer, it also means now that you are necessarily a business person. It's not just, you know, build it and they will come. It doesn't really work that way anymore. You need to promote yourself just as much as you're promoting your clients. And so don't be the plumber with leaky pipes that does everything for their clients, but forgets about the power of storytelling for yourself. So as a freelancer, as anybody out there that is like self-employed, you own your own studio. But I mean, I would say this probably applies in all areas of life, is really pay attention to how you are putting yourself out there. And then, because entrepreneurship is hard, it's probably harder than storytelling, it's harder than filmmaking, especially for creatives that stereotypically, is a general statement, they get into this not for the business part of it. They usually get into it for the creative part of it. So if you're branching off on your own, realize that business is going to be half of it, if not more. And so you really need to kind of either learn to love it or partner with somebody that does, and then don't get discouraged, because being out there on your own is more difficult than being employed by someone else. And so you're not going to necessarily have immediate success. That's okay. That's the expectation. And I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to encourage you that it's not going to happen overnight, and that's okay. Keep pushing. Don't give up. And I think that you'll absolutely get there.
Thank you, Amina, for those words of encouragement. We are now at the top of the hour, so we've still got a few questions, but I don't think we've got time to answer them now. So we'll pull those together.
Let me just say, yeah, well, thanks, Rob. Sorry to interrupt you. I appreciate that you put this slide up here. For anybody that does have additional questions, I would love to answer them. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. On the screen is my email address. Shoot me a note and we can chat. And who knows, maybe that chat can turn into another webinar if you guys have so many questions that we think that could really benefit other people from having a larger discussion together. So please do. You know, one of my greatest passions is passing knowledge forward. I love filmmaking, but I think I love helping people achieve their dreams more, which is why I've started doing more coaching and consulting with film studios, because it's been a wild ride. I've learned a lot of lessons, and it's been really fun. And I know that a lot of people out there can find that same kind of fun and fulfillment. So I'd love to help.
Thank you, Amina. So after this, we'll be sharing the webinar, the recording of the webinar, and actually you should receive that tomorrow. But then I'd just like to take a moment to thank Amina and Phill for their time today. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed it and actually learned a few bits myself. If you do have any further thoughts or questions, you've got Amina's contact details there, or you can message us at Twitter at Trint HQ. But all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.